Good afternoon and most welcome to 998 of the Heidegger series.
999.
Are you sure?
Yes, of course.
Okay, 999, sorry. Just corrected by my colleague here, thank you very much. 999. Well, I do say, it's coming very close to the 4,000. Today I will mention something very positive I already noticed, and it is that once the strange trajectory is established, maybe with the verses or some other convenient repetitive system, it will also bring in the disturbances of the person. Or better put, what we usually perceive as being disturbances within ourselves. I think Ben Ariely in his book Irrationality showed that modern man to 90-95% complains about disturbances like intrusive thoughts, balloon head, or overcrowdedness of the thinking process, but also such things as rushing thoughts, and the thoughts are rushing too fast for them to be caught, and when they can't be caught, they cannot be controlled, they cannot be changed, and it could even go to the stage that the rushing thoughts are so fast so you don't even know what you're thinking, and that will turn you into an automatic machine. And this is a rather terrible state to be in, because then you don't have any control whatsoever with your actions or your thinking, and you usually go down to the limbic system. That it means that very primitive reactive system. Often leads to anger as well, irritation and lack of patience. I've seen that a couple of times. It's very unusual, but it is, I'm afraid, something that is becoming more and more common. But what will happen? These disturbances, I claim in this lecture, are actually something potentially good. And what will happen once the chaotic system gets some strength? It is that the chaotic system, almost like a starting point of a galaxy, it's very small in the beginning, let's imagine that, it will draw some of the material that's outside and inside of it to its system. And when it comes to a galaxy, one of the things that we can observe is the spiraling. The spiraling could be said to some extent to be the very structuring of the galaxy. And this is important to understand, that the spirality of the galaxy is not built within nature or materiality. It is something of an emergent phenomenon when it is complex enough. And you will always have spirality. Although, even more interestingly enough, I didn't know that, the spirals are not exactly the same. They are iteration, but they are not exactly the same. So, since we know about a whole heap of galaxies these days, we can also compare them. And what's been found out is that they are slightly different from each other. But the very majority takes the spiraling effect, and that spiraling effect is what's keeping it together. So there's very hard to some instant to make a change or a difference between what is material and what is structure. That is interesting in itself, and that is important to remember when I'm now talking about the disturbances. I feel those disturbances. I have intrusive thoughts. One example is I can't pass a poster without looking at it and trying to see what is its message, although it is completely uninteresting. It has nothing. The chance there would be anything important for me is zero, but still I look at them, and that's a disturbance coming from within myself. It is I who choose to look at that. And those disturbances are quite massive today. But what I mean is, once the chaotic system starts spiraling, so to speak, it will take in those disturbances, and this will make it stronger. The disturbances could be said to be there in order to bring higher order, and could make it possible for us to be human. And this, of course, as always, we have these new books, or half new books, and we have new material, but everything has a foundation in Heidegger, Derrida, and chaos theory, I would say. And by understanding what Heidegger meant when he said human beings can be higher than animals, but they can also sink lower, then I made an understanding. The higher level, I think, is when we are integrating those disturbances with ourselves, within ourselves. Animals do not seem to have those disturbances at all, or very little. They very seldom get distracted. They very seldom seem to stop what they're doing and ponder about something. They don't seem to be bogged by what they are thinking, feeling, sensing, experiencing. And I think this is what makes us specifically human. And it could be a bad thing. Mostly today it is because of the low level of the chaotic system, but it can also be an extraordinary good thing. It can make us something much, much more than the animals. Why is that? Well, I can give you a hint already now. It is because we can, within ourselves, create differences. And this is not a capacity of the galaxy. It can only use those things that are present, so to speak, around it. Suck those up, integrate them in order. And what could happen with the galaxy, or more commonly with a planet, is that in the end, too much sameness gets to come into the foreground. And that sameness will lead to the destruction of the planet, or the star, or the solar system, or the galaxy. But human beings can produce its own difference, so to speak. And this is what Heidegger is pointing to, the great otherness within ourselves. And that means we could start with otherness outside ourselves. And I think there are two reasons why we have to start with outsideness. It is in contact with the outsideness I can partly control myself, whereas it's very hard to look into myself in the beginning and try to create an organized system. Something that Olle complained 3 years ago at Götabergsgatan. Been training yoga for a long time, I think maybe 6-7 years, but he couldn't achieve stillness of mind. And he said when he was lying in Savasana, still his mind was rushing, and he felt that. And he also made that successful step forward in realizing this rushing. It's not completely pleasurable. It takes a while before you realize it's not completely 100% nice. It's actually disturbance that I think could be turned into something good. So at a certain level it's something irritable. It can actually raise your cardiac speed. And as Joe Dispatcher often pointed out, this is what takes us into the beta level of brain function. And beta level of brain function is the same as Jan Eiskens mentioned as the N2 neural cells, and they have connection to the T2 muscles, the fast twitch muscles, and the flight and fight response. So it's all connected that way. But this disturbances, I say, it's a unique human feature, and that is within ourselves. Once we reach a certain level, we can access that and we can take use of that. We can sort of have a hermeneutical horizon inside. So things can go on without me even interacting too much with the environment once I reached a certain level. And I think that specific advantage is just human. And that, of course, makes that we can develop all the other traits of a chaotic system, like more depth, more width, and permanence. And might this be the explanation how come human beings are the only ones that are more or less permanent? We never cease to exist, something that so many other philosophies, religions, and ideologies already observe. We are rather persistent. The inner difference makes it possible to constantly develop the complexities, and it's obvious in some reason that we soon get more complicated than even the whole of the Milky Way. It sounds absurd, but according to how fractality is constructed, when you zoom in, you can always find more complexities. And as I also mentioned before, scale invariance, as Julian Barber mentions, is a fact of the real world. What you will find is true scale, and that true scale is not dependent on an imagined point of reference in the universe that nobody ever will find. Instead, we have true scale, and that true scale could be the smallest thing in the world. A little bit like William Blake said, the whole world in a grain of sand. And that is similar, of course, to the other saying of William Blake, eternity in a single moment. I think it's obvious when you look at the physical world that all sorts of alternations in the end becomes complexities all systems can use. And by becoming more complex, we also become more multifaceted. We can have more approaches to things. We don't have to approach everything in the same way, as I mentioned with Eric yesterday. But you can also respond in different ways. The very lack of complexity reminds me of a banana fly. They don't have so many things to choose between. They have like 20 different directions to go as a banana fly. Whereas a human being, I would say, when we start to develop reaction-wise, we can develop even further and further, and we can get more complex reactions as time passes. And I don't think there is a real limit to the complexities. And one important step is what I'm trying to propose today, is that when we get used sufficiently by doing exogenous things, creating this strange attractor within ourselves at the same time as I meet the surrounding world, for instance now when I do this lecture, being outside, having people around me, possible causes of disturbances, which in the end can actually affect the whole lecture in a positive manner. Once that brought to a certain level, maybe in a couple of weeks, couple of months, that can be turned like an endogenous horizon, like a hermeneutical horizon towards my inner self, my inner disturbances. I can use those instead. And all of a sudden, I can do it more often, and I can do it to a greater extent. And I think this is one of those growth points where it goes really, really quick. Once you notice every time you have a worry, unnecessary worry, that could be turned into something positive. Once it's sort of comes into the chaotic system, you just take it, grab it, put it inside the chaotic system. And it becomes stronger, it becomes more resilient, it becomes calmer, more organized, more directed. And I have proofs coming from that from Jude Spazio, but also indications from David Bradle. Lisa Friedman suggested similar things and similar tendencies in her test subjects, that all of a sudden, when they looked inward and used the directionality they already sort of established during a certain time, everything went really quick. And there's another thing. to some level you understand that the things that are inside of you are much more harmless than the potential risks of the outside. For instance, here in this glass house, everything can fall down. I did actually think about that when it was a gust of wind here. It could all fall down. It was just a small worry, but it is possible. But once you start to use the material within yourself, I think you somehow know nothing could be harmful there. It is actually part of your system. Of course, it's going to be nasty things and everything, but it's going to be non-dangerous in a very physical way. And the first thing that happens here, according to Henri Bergson, Edmund Husserl, and also how Gleich and Mandelbrot explained it, is it always starts with projection, potential. The first thing we do is direct ourselves. Once we gain this momentum from the chaotic system, when it gets strong enough, it will have its natural directedness. The directedness is not something we have to put there. It is already in the chaotic system. And if you don't feel it, it is because it just needs to get stronger. So there's a training phases here. But don't go look for it, because you can't construct it. It's coming natural from all chaotic systems. There is not a single chaotic system in the cosmos who doesn't have a directedness. It's always present, as long as it's above a certain level of complexity. And once we started to do pretension on an effective scale, this is the weather system we mentioned before. The inventor of the chaos theory, what was his name now?
Gleich.
No, it wasn't Gleich, was it?
No, excuse me. It was Gleich wrote the book
Yes,
about
yes,
it,
yes.
but the inventor was
The weather forecaster, what was his name now? It will come to me, I will put it into the link. What he saw on the list was a directedness, and that directedness did not care about singular details, didn't care about the decimals. What he inferred, the great discovery of chaos theory was when he inferred...
Mandelbrot.
No, it was after Mandelbrot, before Mandelbrot. When he inferred disturbances into the system, that didn't affect the directionality. And that was the real understanding. And this can be seen in two different ways. One way is the butterfly effect, where a little small thing makes everything go in a special direction. That is true of chaotic system, but also the opposite holds. Great disturbances, like almost having an earthquake-like feature inside the system, doesn't change the system. So there's both stability and this sudden change of directionality. There's two interesting features that make chaotic system look alive. And that was the conclusion, at least of Mandelbrot, of course by Gleich and Gribbins, the other scribers of chaos theory. It is a certain liveliness to them. And sometimes they look humane. And you understand, we are chaotic in a way that is even much more advanced, because we have disturbances within ourselves. There's no doubt about that. And those disturbances I haven't spotted in animals to a very, very low degree in that case. Maybe chimpanzees have some conundrum about consciousness. I seriously doubt that. But as human beings, we have so many things that disturbs us. Consciousness, lack of confidence, instability in the thinking, lack of directionality. All those things are actually disturbances, and they could sort of be fed into the system and make it much stronger. And I think the present take on this, if you go to medicine, is that get rid of the disturbances, if you can. Of course they cannot, but what they can do is minimize them. But by minimize them, we know the effect is always stagnation. You won't develop anymore. If you minimize them, they will remain even. And this has been discovered recently with these pills. They're called SNRI. They are serotonin non-anti suppressant. I think that's the whole acronym. And what they do, they try to suppress first all visual features, physical features of disturbances, but also to an extent the mental ones. But it turned out, big investigation that came only 3 or 4 weeks ago, the long-term effect is zero. It's a devastation, of course. I think now these tablets, these pills are so well established, so they won't disappear. People are so used to taking them. But imagine that this information would have come when they were introduced in the late 80s, early 90s. That would have made all those pills disappear. And I think like Elon Musk, like imitating Elon Musk, they could have potential harmful effects because they interact with a part of our system that is very sensitive to modifications. I imagine our physical system is sturdier, so I can more or less eat whatever I want. But when you go to these details in the very balanced system of our brains, we mentioned the cerebellum, Ian McGilchrist, and to some extent Julian Jaynes has mentioned the balance between right and left hemisphere or different factors within the mental sphere. If that gets artificially affected, that could actually lead to a healthy chaos system doesn't get established. It is like they don't show enough patience. And the patience should be, maybe you will have a disturbance one time in your life for a year or two. Maybe you had a divorce, maybe somebody close to you died, maybe you yourself had a complicated disease. And then they start treating these people directly, and they don't get the chance of stabilizing and taking up the disturbances and making them stronger. And I'm quite certain that happened to people in previous lifetimes. It did happen to my ancestors. I had a relative who had broken his leg and he survived anyway. He didn't even have pain, which was in itself, according to medicine, impossible. It didn't bother him. Truly, it didn't bother him. I was thought to myself, at least he would lack sleep. No, he did not. He slept well. More differences is more read-off. And that's the next step. After this wave or directionality is established, something that Mandelbrot would call stability. That stability defies everything that comes into it. So once you have this tropical storm established, it needs to be 2 kilometers, 2.5. Once it's established, everything that comes into it will make it stronger. And that's why they grow larger and larger and larger. And in the end, they can cover 100 to 300 kilometers. And they cause havoc on the world. But our system is exactly the same. Once it reaches stability, it takes up everything, and all disturbances, everything that could hinder it potentially, will make it stronger and stronger and stronger. And I'm quite certain now that we can have that same process. It's a possibility for even us. And we also reach a level that calls delta depth in the projection. Once we reach delta depth and start into building a depth, this is the same level when we get multiple levels, something that is impossible at the lower chaotic system. All of a sudden we get multi-level, and then we can also have awareness, and we can direct ourselves to the point where we want to go. And once we can do that, it grows stronger. And then all of a sudden what we can do is to start with retention. And here we have the real gold mine. As Mandelbrot pointed out, if you have access to all the information that is in one single wave, you can reconstruct all of weather system that's ever been, because it is actually encompassed in each curve. It doesn't vanish, it's still there. And that is one of those remarkable features with fractality. it doesn't give away any knowledge, information. Nothing can disappear. It is not an eradicable system. So once we get into retention and we use the force, the directionality we already have, and we go into our own past, so to speak, what we normally talk about past. And I'm going to use the phrases here which is not 100% accountically correct. I call this pretension the forward thrust, because usually in Western Hemisphere we speak about the future as forward, and I'm going to talk about the past as backward. But later I'm going to deconstruct that. And we already know from Lakoff and Johnson, many cultures talk about what's behind you as the future. But it's a good as a start anyway. It doesn't have to be specific at this stage. Once you started to go into the back of yourself, imagine all the momentous information you had, all the episodes, because only sitting here in the Palm House in central Gothenburg in the Trädgårdsförening, you will have different people, you will have a weather system. All this is my exogenous part, and that is going to be part of something that retention later can come into. Retention is absolutely fantastic, but that means that all the knowledge that's been in the past will be retained in the wave. And that means I can reach, not all of it at once, but I can start to reach back. And this is something Julian Jaynes pointed out. When we moved up to a head, we also lost our Geschichte, as Heidegger called it. We lost the access to our behind. It's gone. And actually there was a lot of complaining about that in written text for at least 300-400 years. They said, I don't feel my past, I don't feel what is knowledge, I can't tell knowledge and non-knowledge apart anymore. This huge lack of understanding about reality that causes. Because if you don't have access to the material that's behind you, how can you successfully reach out and do this complex exogenous move, this hermeneutical horizon that is so complex it is able to read off the difference. It needs to be extraordinary, complicated to make a great read-off. And I think this could be the third point of, I showed yesterday one, like almost brisk jump, and then you have plateau, and the second one is when we started taking up the internal disturbances within ourselves and making the directionality stronger. A third one will be when we reach the material of the what I call past and start using that as a substance, as an energy, as an otherness, as an exogenous thing to be read off. All of a sudden you can access so much more material. And I would say that's absolutely infinite. And that would be the third one, going straight up, because it's just immense. All of a sudden you can understand words to a higher degree because you need to know what is past before to understand how to correctly use a word like, I don't know, antonym, or why not simultaneous. I think it's a good word. I'm going to bring one of those words up, and that's sameness, a word that I think we today don't have access to the degree that we should, because it's an important word. De Bono also pointed that out, that a lot of knowledge of effective words has been lost somehow. He describes that as the words has been shallowed out and not as deep anymore. And of course the depth is more or less delta depth of Susie Froebel, and the width is the temporal sequence. And that means that once we go into our back, we can also extend our time awareness. And that means that we can remember recent happening to a greater degree, and that means that we won't forget as much. Forgetfulness, as pointed out by Heidegger, is not just the forgetfulness of the amnesia, of the ontic thing. It is not a sheer forgetfulness like that, philosophically speaking, No, it is actually a literal forgetfulness in the moment, because it needs to be redone at every moment. The amnesia of the Greeks is not only something that happened in the past, you redo it yourself. Because every moment you make the decision, so to speak, of making the world ontic rather than ontological. So you do that cumbersome process all the time. And it sounds weird, but you got used to it. And it sucks all the energy, all that energy that could be used to strengthen the system. And it's an extra chore to be done. One of those things that makes life unnecessarily tough. And retention is the absolute other. Nothing could be more other than retention. And in normal life, there is an extraordinary tendency that we don't have any retention, thereby we need to block out all the information, all the knowledge, and all the pretension to construct this existence, this now, this presence. And we define our egos are defined solely by taking away knowledge. It is like chopping off a bit of your own arm, trying to create a new arm. So it's a sort of cannibalism or parasitism. And this is, of course, what Derrida points out is happening with the text. Once you enter the text with a certain bias, the bias of the author and your own bias, there are going to be two limiting horizons, and that will limit the scope of the text, both depth and width at the same time. And that can be taken out. It can be shown to exist still. It can never disappear from the text, and that also makes the author eternal in a way. Because there's always, as Kalle pointed out, a signing going on. And that's when you deeply read a text, you sign it, and thereby the author is not gone completely. That goneness, I would say, that absolute sense of complete past is created by our cutting off the past in order to create an existence, a presence, the metaphysics of presence, this cannibalistic tendency. But I would rather say this is the very factor that gives the feel of tiredness in everyday experience, something that Ian McGilchrist observed as being the boredom of the late 18th century. In the 19th century, it escalated. He always had these massive negative terms like the disaster of the fin de siècle, when people started to get really depressed. So it started with boredom, and then it went into depression, and with people like Spengler speaking and writing about the apocalypse of the Western society. It is not only your friend Morrison who speaks about that, Spengler does it as well. Spengler does it from a perspective that I would say is quite accurate. He sees the sign, intelligence is going down, education is going down, but also other things like peacefulness, the idea of a togetherness that used to be the case. Not to forget this marvelous event, the last time in world history, 1914, in Christmas Eve, the day before Christmas, when people gathered from France, England, and Germany to celebrate Christmas together. And that always happened before in world history, but this was the last time. That tendency is brutal. We live in a brutalized world, and the reason is lack of complexity. Lack of complexity is the same as brute reaction, not being very tender, not being directed. It gives frustration within the system. I think the first tendency is that you cut off your own self in order to be in existence, and then you try to defend that little self you have with claws, aggression, that aggression going outside. And I think it's the same tendency I see now in Ian McGilchrist. I read a little bit from his book yesterday before I fell asleep, and he noticed that the left hemisphere is not having a lot of emotions, but one emotion it does have, and all that emotion is centered in the left hemisphere, and that is aggressiveness. It's all in the left hemisphere. And I think that goes hand in hand what I'm trying to explain now. The very frustration, the lack of satisfaction, the lack of knowledge, the lack of knowing that you are going on a certain path, but also the lack of safety. It drives us to the idea of metaphysics of presence and keeping the little we have in a stormy world. And especially taking in what I mentioned now, that our inner life is stormy as well. But it could be our inner life is stormy for a good reason, to be something positive, to be something that we can actually meet with another fractality and read off and use to make us invincible, resilient. I also like the term of Kabat-Zinn and Taleb Nayyib. Taleb Nayyib wrote a book called Anti-Fragility, and he means that we can become anti-fragile. We can become stronger and stronger. And one of those things that you can take in that could actually make you much stronger is the disturbances you have within. Instead of seeing those as feelings I have to escape, irritability, boredom, pain, nausea, tiredness, all those things. And maybe this impossible dream of what's his name, Dujon Mondeau, this French Alexander teacher I mentioned maybe a year and a half, he said, I don't even know what tiredness is. It shouldn't be such a fact with a superposition system. It's completely strong. I go to sleep when I have to, but I'm never tired. I don't know what it is. Of course, that sounds astonishing. I can believe when I see him, but I don't think his way of showing how to reach that, I don't think that would work, because we need the understanding of chaos theory. I would get back to one of those obstacles, and one of those obstacles is this either or, that we think we have to choose. We can't have both. We can't both have the butterfly effect and the stability, because the chaotic system shows the biggest stability in the universe, but it also has the butterfly effect, and that is extraordinary in itself. But they are, when we get into a higher system, and I think that understanding is reached already by Mandelbrot, once you reach this higher level of existence, you will also understand that the disturbance is not something bad. And of course, once you think yourself is bad, what you have in yourself is bad, that would make things even worse. Most people today, they flee from the memories, they take them away, because as I mentioned, in the logic of classical physics, it's bad either way. Either it is something I really enjoyed, therefore it's gone. Yesterday's pie, for instance, I had a meat pie yesterday, it was delicious, and if I think about it now, I don't have it in front of me. But also a bad experience. The pain I had 4 months ago in my back one day, it's also a bad memory. So both we try to get away, take away, abort. And then I'm going to use my energy to block my memories. And all people do this today. This is actually the working of the N2 cells. They are flight and fight. So what they do inside our neural system is trying to block out memory. And it takes at least 25% of the capacity of the brain to do that all the time. And that is energy that you lose when you are going to do other things. You are going to work on a 75% level all the time, because you spend so much energy in blocking those things out. And here, of course, we have a rather interesting connection with the T2 muscles. What are their purpose in this case, Kalle? What do you think?
T2? You
Yes,
mean?
the T2. I just mentioned.
It is the energy of a cat.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. So it's quick. But what is your question exactly?
I can show you. Come here. You can come here. I can show you.
So for the camera, we need
Stand
to.
in front of the camera.
Okay, I think it's good. Let me see. This looks like that. Yes. No, it's not.
Come here from the camera. This is the pain or the strain you have here. These are the T2 muscles, and it's also the muscular tension that goes this direction. And this is why we sort of make ourselves more narrow. While when we find the sitting bone and we let our consciousness go down to the seat, it's a widening directly. You widen your shoulders. And what the T2 muscles are doing is contracting. And that is the equivalent of the N2 neurons in the neurological system trying to suppress memories. So we spend a lot of energy in our bodies to suppress distasteful memories. And that is the other reason for we are misusing ourselves, because the tensions, especially in shoulders and in neck, are to get rid of memories. And when you tense your neck here, you also block your access to your body, and that is where the memories are sitting. This is what Richard E. Lind demonstrated, that going of consciousness to the head is also a cutting off of the body, literally, because we tense our necks to stop the neural material coming into the brain. And it's a very, very thin line, exactly where the axis is between the atlas, the atlanto-occipital, cervical, and the skull. It's so sensitive, so only a little change on 1/10 of a millimeter will cause havoc. It will actually make your legs not be felt anymore, your skin sensation, you will take away everything. And oddly enough, since there is a double loop on oral senses, they actually reach down to the body. They give their sensation this way. You will also block out visual, auditory, olfactory, taste. All those things will be gone. And of course you lose your proprioception. And this is a defense mechanism we use all the time to block out memories. So most people today don't have any access. So it's not as easy as Matthias Ribbing says, train up your memory. We need to get down with the tensions, because we are perpetually getting rid of memories, and we are so habituating in doing that. So if we don't do that, we have a much better chance of evolving our memories. There are no known cases in primitive man where there is a lack of memory. No, they remember everything they ever heard that is of importance. They don't forget. Forgetfulness is a Western thing, and it can be trained away, but we need to add the muscular resilience, because once we get into that position, the object or the subject, Kalle here, he will remember better, because he's now more directed. It's already more directed because you are wider, I can see it here. The widening of the shoulders will also lengthen the back, and that always happens. As soon as you feel your sitting bones, or as soon as I feel the position of my feet, there will be a difference every time. And that means by repeating it, making this sort of a bodily strength attractor, that will grow every time you do it, and you will have the same 3 steps. I'm quite certain, because like the climb bottom, there is a reflection between the inner and the outer. And as you hear, there is a very, very close connection between the N2, because those are the fast twitch neurons. They consume more energy, and they seem to be blocking out things rather than helping the brain. Whereas the N1, they are a bit slower, but they are helping the brain. The same with the muscles. The T1 muscles, they help the posture, they also help all movement, whereas the N2 are hindering. They consume more energy, and as an extra bonus, so to speak, they also give out lactic acid. What is lactic acid? Ken is showing, and I will show it even more. Lactic acid is this. Oh, I am too tired, I fall together, then I stretch myself, and then I fall together. When I ask people, why are you doing it? I didn't know before either, and I said, because I get tired. What is it that gets tired? Your positional muscles shouldn't get tired. They are inexhaustible. They can stay on for 9 to 10 to 20 hours. They are completely inexhaustible. That's an absolute proof you are using the wrong muscles altogether. That's the only explanation. And we thereby have a great chance of helping each other and become stronger. And the fine thing is, since there is a double take on this, that the inside is similar to the outside, it means we can train both ways, and we can gain double the amount of training. And the stronger I get, the more of my memories I can take in, and the stronger I get. Once the direction is set in motion, and all of a sudden, yesterday's eating pie doesn't have to be a bad thing. It could be a good thing, because maybe I can ask for a recipe, and I can do it myself. Everything can be looked in different ways. That's the Necker cube. And all of a sudden, I am sort of negotiating memories I had that I said were bad. Now I realize could even be that I was completely wrong. It wasn't even a bad memory. And I think that's really the top of the whole thing. What I interpreted to be a bad thing wasn't even a bad thing. Because once you go to a slouch, you take away your brain capacity, you take away your body capacity, and then you also take away the capacity to understand what's happening around you. And listen to this. The T1 muscles are called the calm muscles, the resilient muscle, whereas the T2 is flight and fight. And that means that you are perpetually scared. And then you are bound to interpret what happens around you as bad things. There is a bias for negativity built in with both N2 and T2, and that is bound to sort of color your experience. And all of a sudden we can talk about truer experience and less truer experience. We don't have to go into that epistemological conundrum that most people go through now. When they are so cut off from the world, they are like flying heads, or why not the Putnamian brain in the vat. How can you know if it's an illusion or if it's true, if it's a lie or if it's a non-lie? Then you don't know anything. So this, I think, it's a fantastic way, and I'm so happy it comes now at the end of the 1000, because we are actually lucky enough to reach a peak just by the 1000. So I end here.
This week I was working on a paper about the year, and it struck me that Jesus said that we think with our hearts. So we think that Jesus was a primitive man, but it's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
But I would like to criticize Ian McIntyre for something. Okay, he speaks much about the two hemispheres about the brain, but that continues the misconception in a way that we think with our brains.
Yeah.
So it's a paradoxical. Okay, McIntyre does a good thing, but
well,
the problem is that we should force to think with our fingers, and not to. So that is the.
It's rather scary. It's the same comment that Jan Eystens made. So he said also that he often observes Ian McIntyre using his hands in a rather fumbly fashion, and he says that it is actually in the body as well. So it could be seen as a rather limited explanation, but still, even it's a little bit like the relationship between Julian James and Ian McGilchrist. You can still use all of the information of Ian McGilchrist because the research is done is massive. But just as Kalle says, we need to take in the whole body.
Already for 1 year ago, it's more than an hour ago, we saw Rob Pfeiffer with his robots, this talk. But it's not only this last week of May, when I tried to explain, yes, he thought that the seed of consciousness is an art. That is, we still don't think like Jesus thought.
No.
No, we still think without rest, which is a problematic.
Absolutely agree.
Okay, thank you.
What a great lecture. Thank you very much for participating and lending me your hand, Kalle. And I'm going to end this shoot with some palm trees. Say thank you very much.